Okay, on that first sheet, we're down to chapter 3, and we're on number 3. If you weren't here last week, number 1, this chapter is specifically directed to Jerusalem and Judea. The first 2 chapters were directed to the whole world, to mankind. But these 2 are specifically directed to Jerusalem and Judea. Number 2, the degree of consequences, they're far more harsh. If you look at the world as a whole, or the entire Gentile world, a lot of bad things were going to happen. But the first thing he did to Jerusalem and Judea was to take away the food and the water. So we talked about last week, to whom much is given, much is required. They were given the Savior. They were given the Torah. They were given far more than the rest of the world were given, and they were the greatest transgressors. So the consequences were far more worse for them than it was for the rest of the world in chapters 1 and 2. All right, that brings us to 3. No, I'm sorry. He removed their physical needs. Number 4. Number 4, he removed their leadership. Why would he do that?
So they would trust in him. So they would learn to trust in him and
Okay.
no one else.
So it would force them to maybe come back into the fold. What was their transgression? That's the right answer. That's the right answer. But what was their transgression?
Trusting in idols.
Right, they were the leadership, and they were allowing all these idols and all this idol worship to come in, and they were leading the people astray. Remember, we talked about the cedars of Lebanon and the totems, and how David bought cedar from Lebanon so that Solomon would have it to put on the inside of the temple, because back then it was like us using walnut. The post office in French Lick, if you ever go in there and look at the lobby, the entire lobby is solid walnut. It was built in 1935, and it cost $3 million to build that building. And in 1935, that was like a $14 million building today. The entire structure is 12-inch concrete. And they paneled the entire lobby with solid walnut. The first contractor that tried to build it went bankrupt, and they had to hire another one. It was a very elaborate building. Well, back then it was like us putting solid walnut on our living room walls. To have a Lebanese cedar was the ultimate luxury in building. So David had purchased all these, and he wasn't allowed to build the temple because he had blood on his hands. But he purchased all these, and he purchased all the stones. So when Solomon took over the throne, he was 3/4 done. All he had to do was have a bunch of workmen put it together. And but the leadership at that day, they had led the people, they had allowed or led the people into idol worship. And when it's talking about all those cedars and all those tall trees and everything, they use those tall trees to make totems, like the Indian totems. And we still see it today, because in the Muslim cities, they have their prayer towers where they ring the bells all over the city, and everybody stops to pray. I think it's 5 times a day. 5 times a day. So there was a thing about towers and high places, and that's where they built their temples and everything, and God was not happy with it. All right, so he removed the leadership, because without good leadership, it says without a vision, the people will perish. And it's up to our leadership to lead us toward a vision. And it does work. It does work, because if you go back and you look through history, if they have a moral king, the country prospered. If they had an immoral king, or a king that led them into false worship, the country struggled. There was at one point, there were 12 kings, 2 were good and 10 were bad. And also, if you look at when they crossed the Jordan River, 10 of the tribes said, we don't want to go over there and confront the people who are living there. There's no way in the world we can tear down the walls of
Jericho.
Huh?
Jericho.
Jericho. Yeah, there's no way we can tear down. I knew it was a J. But we can't fight the walls of Jericho. And so 10 tribes said no, and two said yes. So they wandered around in the wilderness for another 40 years because the leadership of those tribes would not step forward in faith. And the whole country suffered. It's the same with any government. If the government is corrupt, or if it's not moral, the whole country's going to struggle. The family unit's going to struggle. The children are going to struggle. The school systems are going to struggle. Everything's going to be a struggle. Now, on the other hand, if the leadership is for the good of the people and takes a moral approach and tries to do what's right, then the country will prosper. So he gets rid of the leadership. He said, I'm taking you out of there. How does that, we're not really a democracy, we're a democratic republic, but how does that work in a democracy? Or how should it work?
Means we should choose moral leaders.
Yes, we should vote morally. How do we vote?
Politically. Politically.
We vote politically?
Selfishly sometimes.
Greed. Greed.
Economically.
Economically. Who was it? It was, I forget which president said. He said it's all about the economy. If I'm going up for re-election and the economy's down, I'm probably not going to get re-elected. If I go up against the economy and I'm the worst guy in the world and the economy's up, I'm probably going to get elected. It's all about the economy. Or if you just want to get personal about it, it's all about my billfold. I'm going to do what's best for my billfold. Now, is there anything wrong with that?
Depends. Depends.
Depends.
What you know? Yes, if it's all, you know, if the money's just for you and yourself, yes. But if you're using the money to help others and to build up others, it can be good.
Good point. Good point. Bottom line is, if I vote the moral ticket, God's going to bless me no matter what. No matter what Washington does, God's going to bless me. And, you know, we were talking last week about, I got a 6% raise for my Social Security and lost $5 because my Medicare went from $99 to $219 a month. And my life insurance doubled. And by the time they gave me the 6% and then doubled all this stuff, I ended up losing money. But, and when I first saw it, gotta admit to you, I was aggravated. I mean, I just wanted to yell at somebody. But I got control of myself and I said, Washington is not my prosperity. I am not gonna worry about this. And I just filed them in the box and went on about my life. And after a day or two, I quit thinking about it. And then I got my first two portfolios in, and they were 15.2%. God took care of me. God took care of me. Washington, it doesn't have anything to do with my prosperity. I trust God for my needs. And Washington can just do what Washington does. And I can go back and I can track that back, even on years when like for instance, when I retired, I put $82,000 into the retirement fund. And I was not supposed to pay taxes on any of that until I had drawn out $82,000. Because I had already paid taxes on it throughout the 50 years that I worked. That money had already been taxed. So when they started Social Security, you wouldn't have to pay money on the money that you sent in. Well, 3 years before I retired, they changed all that, and now you only get a $2,000, which means I gotta live 40 years after I retire to get my $82,000 back. Who lives 40 years after they retire? I'll be 100 and something when I break even.
Pay off the ladders. You might make it.
God took care of the ladders too. I am not. Now, if I start getting dizzy or weak, I won't be on the ladder. But both those instances, dumb accident. So he took leadership away. He said, "You're not leading the people. You're leading them in false worship. You're not doing what's right for the economy. You're taking advantage of the poor. You're not taking care of the widows and the orphans. I'm taking you out." You know, if we're in a democracy and we see that our government isn't doing what it should be doing, we shouldn't re-elect them. Period. But these guys spend 50, 60 years in come. It seems like it's sort of like the time of Noah. The longer they're there, the worse they get. And how do you make $160,000 a year and become a millionaire in 4 years? The math just doesn't happen. But let's get off that. Number 5, verses 5 through 8. He turned him over to a reprobate mind. He said, "This is what you want? You want to wallow in this squalor? You want to wallow in this immorality? You want to chase after these false gods? Fine. I'll just let you have what you want." And going back to democracies, after the vote's over, when it's all said and done, we can't complain because we're the ones that voted to do. In this situation, he deals with the leadership, or he deals with the people, and he says, now, the people were in a little different situation back then because kings usually turned over the throne to their sons. And if it was a bad king, he probably had a bad son. And it just got worse and got worse and got worse. In our situation, we're supposed to be in control. We're supposed to vote. We're supposed to take charge of the situation. And if we don't, we got what we bought. Bottom line is, we got what we bought. So, we need to ask ourselves, how are we supposed to do this? In Romans, in Matthew 24 and in Romans chapter 1, we find that and it coincides with these 5 through 8, the natural love is lost. The love of the mother for the children, the love of the family for each other, the brotherly love, the natural love that God instilled into our society and into our lives, it's lost. How do you live in a city where 20 people get killed every weekend? I used to love to go to Chicago and take the kids up there after Christmas We'd take the kids up there between Christmas and New Year's and we'd shop because everything was half price. And we could go up there and we could get, you know, we gave them something for Christmas and everything, but then they always look forward to going up there and going to the malls. I wouldn't take a kid to Chicago to a mall. You couldn't, and I used to love to go up there and eat. The restaurants are great up there. Not going up there. You'll never see this body in Chicago ever again. Matter of fact, we went to Minnesota 2 years with the grandkids, and in order to avoid Chicago and Gary and Minneapolis and St. Paul, we took 35 of them and went around the mall because we didn't want to be near them and we didn't want the kids to be near them. We probably went 50, 60 miles out of the way and had to get off the interstates and go on the 2-lane roads. But once you get halfway up in Minnesota, you can drive 70 miles on every 2-lane road up there. And they're as wide as 145. I mean, they got shoulders as wide as lanes on them. Nobody living up there, but a bunch of lakes and fish and bears and moose. And you just fly along like you're on an interstate. Matter of fact, if you're ever in Minnesota and you see headlights coming up behind you and they flash at you, you're supposed to go over on the shoulder and let them go by at 100 miles an hour. That's really, they'll be coming up on you and they'll be driving hard. You see the headlights and you see they're coming apart and they'll flash at you a couple times. You're supposed to move over on the shoulder. And if you don't, they go over the shoulder and they wave at you with one finger as they go. Same way in Wyoming too, by the way. Verse 9. Notice they show their guilt. They show their guilt. That my life. Where are we at? Verse 9. The look on their faces testifies against it. They parade their sin like Sodom and do not hide it. Have you ever dealt with a kid that was guilty and he's lying to you? You know he's lying to you, don't you? He won't look you in the eye. He's kind of looking up to the left, and he won't look you in the eye and say, "No, Mom, I didn't do it." "No, Mom, I didn't do that." And they won't make, right?
Yep.
And it's the same way with an employee. If you're at work and you have an employee a question about something, I had a customer call in and said that, and he said, "Well, no, that's not exactly right." I said, "Well, what's your side of the story?" And he won't look me in the eye. Now, if he looks me in the eye and said, "Hey, that's not what happened out there." So then I go out and I talk to the customer and he won't look me in the eye. Well, I know what's going on. So, and you can tell if somebody's lying to you. Now, there are psychopaths out there that can tell lies and they don't have a conscience left. And so it's hard, but 99% of the people aren't psychopaths. And most people can't look you in the eye and tell a lie without forecasting it to you. Well, he's saying here in verse 9, their faces are showing their guilt. And our faces do show our guilt. I mean, for the most part, we are built with a conscience, and we are built with a tendency to project our sin. It's part of being conscious, and it's part of the compass that God has put in our spirit to draw us toward Him. How often have you really enjoyed your sin for the whole part. Maybe while you're in the midst of it and you're at the bar and you're, feeling good, but then the next morning you wake up and you feel the consequences. Okay? And then you start dealing with, well, what did I do? And if you're a Christian, it's like, yeah, I messed up last night. There was no witness in that. And then you have to deal with guilt. Right? Well, there's a compass put in us that draws us to God. And when you're being drawn to a righteous God, it's kind of hard to deal with the immorality of the sinful life. And that was put in there on purpose by God. Okay, any questions on that part? All right, somebody read 10 through 26.
Tell the godly that all will be well for them. They will enjoy the rich reward they have earned. But the wicked are doomed, for they will get exactly what they deserve. Childish leaders oppress my people, and women rule over them. O my people, your leaders mislead you. They send you down the wrong road. The Lord takes his place in court and presents his case against his people. The Lord comes forward to pronounce judgment on the elders and rulers of his people. You have ruined Israel, my vineyard. Your houses are filled with things stolen from the poor. How dare you crush my people, grinding the faces of the poor into the dust, demands the Lord and the Lord of heaven's armies. The Lord says, beautiful Zion is haughty, craning her neck, elegant neck, flirting with her eyes, walking with dainty steps, tinkling her ankle bracelets. So the Lord will send scabs on her head. The Lord will make beautiful Zion bald. On that day of judgment, the Lord will strip away everything that makes her beautiful. Ornaments, headbands, crescent necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and veils, scarves, ankle bracelets, sashes, perfumes, and charms, rings, jewels, hardy clothes, gowns, capes, and purses, mirrors, fine linen garments, head ornaments, and shawls. Instead of smelling of sweet perfume, she will stink. She will wear a rope for a sash, and her elegant hair will fall out. She will wear rough burlap instead of rich robes. Shame will replace her beauty. The men of the city will be killed with the sword, and her warriors will die in battle. The gates of Zion will weep and mourn. The city will be like a ravaged woman huddled on the ground.
Okay. All right. Verse number 10, God says, time out. We went through 2.5 verses of this, and it is real dark. And then he takes a time out and he says, tell the righteous it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. And then he goes right back to it again, right back to the unrighteous. Why such a brief statement? Why didn't he say, whoa, now, there's going to be a throne in a New Jerusalem, and the streets are going to be made of gold, and you're going to have a mansion. Why does he just say, kind of brief, isn't it? After 2.5 chapters of doom and gloom, he says, oh, but all you guys righteous over there in the corner, it's going to be okay.
Wants to make sure that the righteous aren't bragging about it, saying, haha, we're there, we're going to have this, and you're not going to have that. And he also wants to make sure that okay, you're righteous. Now, listen, if you turn the other way, this is what's going to happen. You need to, with a child, you can say, okay, if you're good, you'll be good. But if you're not, this is what's going to happen to you.
All right. Anybody else?
It's like when Christ said the sick are the ones that need a doctor, not the well.
Good point. Good point. I shouldn't need a lot of reinforcement after being a Christian for 53 years. 63 years. I shouldn't need a lot of reinforcement. I should look at the world that's all falling apart, and it's always been falling apart. There have been good years and bad years, but the world's the world, and it's fallen apart. But, you know, I should be seeing clearly. I should be living on an upper level. I shouldn't need a lot of reinforcement after I've walked with the Lord for 63 years. I should know that tomorrow's going to be okay. But he takes this moment and he says, you guys just keep you calm over there, it's going to be okay. Then he goes right back to it again. Because the world's not listening. Did you hear about the tsunami? It hit California and Washington. And if you look at the way the hurricanes are going, it seems to be hitting the people that need to hear the truth the most. The hurricanes come in, they hit New Orleans, and then they turn and do a 45-degree angle right up to liberal America in the northeast up there with Washington and New York and all those states. Denver, Colorado, and Colorado is really taking a turn for the worse politically. They had a wildfire right in the middle of Denver and took out how many thousand houses and killed how many people. If you look at the way the world is turning, when I was a kid, I remember they used to be worried about a level 7 earthquake. Most of the earthquakes were 4s and 5s. Now, it's not uncommon to have 200 level 7 earthquakes throughout the world in a week. You know, it's getting more intense. It's getting harder to ignore it now. And God is screaming at the top of his lungs, turn away from your worldly way. Now, us, we should recognize what God's doing and know that we're not part of it. We live on a higher level. We live on higher ground. We do not have to worry about all this because all the promises in the Bible are ours. And we shouldn't have to have constant and continual reinforcement. We live by faith and we stand on faith and we allow God's mercy to rule our day. And in 11 you see the general indictment, and we'll get into the rest of this next week. And chapter 4 was only going to take 5 minutes because it's just a wrap up of the first 30, and we're going to shoot right on through that to chapter 5. But the indictment is, the general indictment is in 11. Woe to the wicked, disaster is upon them, they will be paid back for what their hands have done. Okay, disaster is upon them. If the world is falling apart in our lives, in our state, or in our country, if you go back in the Old Testament, did the worldly country that Daniel lived in affect Daniel? No. About Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego? How about Moses? How about Noah? No, it didn't affect them. The world was going to hell in a handbasket, and Noah's building an ark and taking care of his family, and isn't the least bit concerned about it. He's just being obedient to what God told him to do. Daniel threw open his shutters and prayed facing east, and went into the lion's den without, the king almost apologized to him for having to do it. He said, my God will be with me. It's not a big deal. It was a big deal to the guys that lied to the king about 3 days later, but it wasn't a big deal for Daniel to go in there and sit around with the lions. It didn't affect him whatsoever. And that is our charge, to live as if we are already in the kingdom of God, and to be a witness to the people out there who are desperate. I spent 20 minutes at a meat counter a week ago talking to a woman who had never spoke to me in her life about what's going on in the world today. I was standing there waiting to see if they had any chicken thighs, and this woman walks up behind me, who's not my friend, and I've seen her around town, and I know who she is, but the most I've ever spoken to her was she had asked me for a book of stamps. I'd take her money, say thank you, and she'd walk out the door. She walks up to me, of all people, standing there at the meat counter, and says, what do you think about what's going on in the world today? I turned around, looked at her, and I thought, are you talking to me? And we stood there for 20 minutes talking about, and I said, well, the Bible tells us all this is going to happen. I said, but it also tells us that if you're a believer, we win. She said, well, you don't seem worried about it. I said, my God's in charge. And we talked for 20 minutes about religious stuff at a meat counter at the JC store. People are desperate. I'm not.